I sat at the long oak table in my in-laws' enormous Virginia mansion, which exuded an air of ancient money. Considering ancient grudges, the air was heavy with tension, and there was a Thanksgiving spread that could have fed a small army. More than my wife Clarissa's gravy, which I could feel crushing down on me like a damp blanket as it was passed around. She had the tight-lipped sneer on her face that she always wore when she was going to reveal some arrogant little secret. I should have realized something was coming because the symptoms were obvious, and she had been too silent. The turkey sat there untouched all afternoon, her eyes darting about the room as if she was waiting for her cue. I had just reached 4. My fork as steam continued to rise from it when she got up and tapped her wine glass. Before we carved the turkey, everyone fell silent as the clinking sound of the spoon pierced the conversation like a gunshot. Her voice brimming with the false sweetness she employed to sound dignified, she said, "We have an announcement." Then, I watched her pause for impact while soaking up the mashed potatoes, and I froze, my hand hovering above them. "But we voted," she said, her grin growing harsher. "And for a brief moment, you are no longer family." I assumed I had misheard her since the words didn't sink in. Instead, they immediately floated there, heavy and ridiculous. When her brother Silas began to giggle, he gave a loud guffaw and raised his glass as if to salute me. His wife, Brielle, clapped her hands together, letting out a piercing little giggle. Even my father-in-law, Calvin, leaned back in his chair and nodded smugly, as if he were simply placing a wager. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, didn't laugh, but she also didn't seem startled. Instead, she just looked at me with her icy, calculating eyes. Even as the room whirled around me with their jeering applause, I remained motionless, and my heart rate remained constant. It wasn't shock that kept me composed. Rather, it was something else I'd been clinging to for a while. This may not be the exact words, but the sentiment behind how they had treated me over the years, as if I were some hired hand, was clear. Clarissa stood there waiting for me to react, most likely anticipating that I would plead or storm out in a rage. But instead of giving her the gratification she wanted, I leaned back in my chair and reached down to the simple black messenger bag I had packed and thrown under the table. When I took out a heavy manila folder and placed it on the table with a gentle thump, the laughter subsided a little. "You won't need this, I suppose, when you get to the cranberry sauce," I said in a flat but loud enough voice to be heard over the abrupt silence. Clarissa's grin wavered for a moment, and I saw the glimmer of doubt in her eyes. Calvin's arrogant expression hardened as he tilted his head in curiosity, and Brielle stopped clapping her hands mid-air. Silas's smirk shifted into something exhausted, as if he detected a change he hadn't anticipated. I remained silent and watched. They let the weight of that folder sink in. It contained not just paper, but 10 years' worth of their lies. Lies I had swallowed just to maintain harmony. But now it was my turn to create something even messier, compared to that turkey sitting there waiting for a knife for years without knowing what was going to happen. I had been the quiet one, the trustworthy one, the one who took care of the issues and paid the bills without raising a fuss. They most likely assumed that I would accept this like I had accepted everything else. Nod, perhaps mumble something caustic, and let it go. But this time, I was finished playing their game. I could see it in their expressions as they sat there, as if staring at a loaded gun, beginning to wonder what I'd been up to. I'd been keeping quiet for 10 years, letting them wonder and sweat, putting all of my money, time, patience, and effort into creating a life with these people, only for them to laugh in my face and tell me that I didn't belong. If I wasn't family to them, then I owed them nothing at all. I leaned forward slightly on the table and looked directly into Clarissa's eyes. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by something anxious. She looked at the folder and then back at me as if she were attempting to determine whether I was bluffing. Silas might have whispered something to Brielle, but I missed it because the atmosphere had changed, and I could sense the shift in the air just before a storm. They had enjoyed their little vote, their big moment. Now it was my turn. I didn't have to yell or bash the table to get their attention. The folder was enough. It contained all I had concealed and everything I had overlooked. The things I had recorded over the years. They believed I was too dim to see their schemes. But as I sat there and watched their arrogance crumble, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one looking in from the outside. I watched as Clarissa pulled the folder toward her. The smug smirk clung to her face, but her fingers trembled just enough to betray her nerves. She thought I was bluffing, or, worse, she thought she was untouchable. The dining room was completely silent, but now the clinking of silverware was replaced by the rustle of paper. I crossed my arms and sat back in my chair as she flipped through the first page, then the second. And I saw it. The exact moment her world began to fall apart. Her smile disappeared. Her lips parted in a quiet gasp. And then she screamed. Not a loud cry, not a small yelp, but a jagged, piercing sound that echoed off the high ceilings and ripped through the room like a siren. Papers streamed across the table, some falling to the floor. She dropped the folder as if it had burned her hands. Silas lunged forward, grabbing it before anyone else could. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the contents. He didn't have to read far. The proof was already there. Black and white copies of emails, bank statements, evidence of the years they had bled me dry. Clarissa stumbled back in her chair. "You're a twisted creature," she whispered, pointing at me with a trembling hand. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Everything in that folder is true," I said calmly. "You never imagined that I would fight back." Silas slammed the folder shut, his face red. "You've been sitting on this?" he hissed, as if I had betrayed him instead of the other way around. I shrugged. "I've been sitting on a lot of things." The room was unraveling. Brielle murmured something about lawyers. Calvin's face had turned pale. Evelyn clutched the table edge, her knuckles white. Clarissa's voice was barely a whisper. "You're ruining everything." I leaned in closer. "No," I said. "You did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." And for the first time in 10 years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. I felt the burden leave my chest after years of seeing children scamper when they were bored. I carried them all, my bills, favors, and guilt trips, and they allowed me to, because I was only a means to an end. Clarissa's dream, Silas, not family, to them. Penny's teeth, Calvin's heart, and her people were her narrative, and I was just the man who made it happen. But the folder served as my evidence that I wasn't the idiot they believed. Yes, they had practiced my exile, but they hadn't practiced this struggle with me. They backed me as I left, and while I sat there, the turkey was still heating, unopened. They never truly noticed me, not while I sat there in that damaged place. So they knew, for sure, they wouldn't see me approaching. The file's contents were strewn across the Thanksgiving table like confetti from a party no one wanted to go to. The air was heavy with shock, the kind that makes family members struggle under the weight of their own lives when secrets are brought to light. I could feel everyone watching me,